The avoidant spent the entire relationship convinced they didn't need anyone, that independence was their strength, that they could walk away from connection without consequence. They maintained careful distance to prove to themselves and to you that they were self-sufficient, that relationship was optional rather than essential, that they were doing you a favor by staying rather than staying because they needed to. But something shifted after the separation. The avoidant is experiencing life without you, and that experience is revealing needs they spent years denying. They're discovering that the independence they valued was only sustainable because you were there providing foundation they never acknowledged. They're recognizing that the self-sufficiency they claimed was actually dependence they refused to admit. The realization is hitting in waves, each wave bringing new awareness of how much they relied on you for things they told themselves they didn't need from anyone. The avoidant is finally understanding that needing someone isn't weakness but reality, and that denying need doesn't eliminate it, but only ensures you lose what you need before recognizing its value. This realization is devastating and clarifying simultaneously, breaking open their defensive structure while showing them truths about themselves they've avoided their entire adult life. The emotional regulation dependency recognition. The avoidant maintained the belief that they were emotionally self-regulating, that they managed their own feelings without external support or input. They prided themselves on not needing someone to calm them down, cheer them up, or help them process difficult emotions. But living without you is revealing the truth they couldn't see while you were present. You were regulating their emotions constantly in ways so subtle the avoidant never registered the support. Your presence created baseline calm that allowed them to function. Your steady energy balanced their anxiety even when they claimed to have no anxiety. Your emotional attunement helped them identify and process feelings they would have otherwise suppressed into numbness or explosion. The recognition of this dependency emerges through the avoidant's inability to regulate themselves effectively in your absence. They notice they're more irritable, more reactive, more prone to emotional flooding than they were during the relationship. Small frustrations that they would have handled easily now feel overwhelming. Stress that they used to manage without effort now accumulates into physical symptoms and sleep disruption. The avoidant is discovering that their emotional stability wasn't entirely self-generated. It was co-created with you, dependent on your presence and participation in ways they never acknowledged or appreciated while they had access to it. The dependency recognition also includes the avoidant realizing all the ways you helped them process emotions without them recognizing the help. You listened when they talked about work stress, and that listening helped them metabolize the stress rather than carrying it. You asked gentle questions that helped them identify what they were actually feeling beneath surface reactions. You provided perspective when they were spiraling in anxiety or rumination, offering alternative interpretations they couldn't generate alone. All of this emotional labor was invisible to the avoidant because it was so smoothly integrated into daily interaction. They experienced the benefits without seeing the mechanism, taking your contribution for granted as if their emotional stability was purely their own achievement. The recognition forces the avoidant to confront how much harder life is without your emotional regulation support. They're managing everything alone now, and the burden is significantly heavier than they anticipated. The avoidant is learning that they weren't as independent as they believed, that emotional self-regulation is genuinely difficult without partnership, that needing someone's calming presence isn't weakness but human reality. This learning is humbling because it destroys their self-concept as someone who doesn't need emotional support from others. They're discovering that everyone needs emotional co-regulation, and pretending otherwise just meant taking yours for granted instead of appreciating it. The meaning and purpose void. The avoidant told themselves they had independent sources of meaning and purpose in life. Their career, their hobbies, their personal goals provided direction and fulfillment without needing relationship to give life significance. But without you, these supposedly independent sources of meaning feel hollow and insufficient. The avoidant is going through the motions of activities that used to bring satisfaction and finding them empty. Accomplishments that would have felt significant now feel pointless. Goals they were working toward seem arbitrary and unimportant. The void reveals that you were central to their sense of meaning in ways they never consciously acknowledged. This void emerges because the avoidant is realizing that meaning isn't purely individual but relational. Things mattered because they could share them with you, because you cared about their progress and celebrated their achievements, because your presence gave context and significance to their experiences. The avoidant thought they were pursuing goals for themselves, but they were actually pursuing them at least partially for you and because of you. Your interest made things interesting. Your pride in them made accomplishments meaningful. Your witness to their life gave experiences weight and reality they don't have when experienced alone. The recognition of this void is particularly devastating because it contradicts the avoidant's entire philosophy of self-sufficiency. They organized their life around the principle that they didn't need anyone to give their existence meaning, that they could generate purpose internally without relationship to validate or reflect it. But the emptiness they're experiencing proves this principle was false. They do need someone to share meaning with. They do need relationship to make accomplishments feel significant. They do need your specific presence and participation to make life feel full rather than hollow. The avoidant is confronting that their fierce independence was actually defensive denial of natural human needs for connection and shared meaning. The void also includes the avoidant's recognition that they can't simply replace you with other sources of meaning. They try filling the emptiness with more work, new hobbies, increased social activity, but nothing addresses the fundamental absence of shared purpose with someone who knows them deeply. The avoidant is learning that meaning is partially about having someone who cares about what you care about, who understands why things matter to you, who shares the journey rather than just witnessing isolated moments. They had that with you and didn't realize its value until it was gone. Now they're stuck with the awareness that life feels less meaningful without you in it, and this awareness is forcing them to reconsider everything they believed about independence and self-sufficiency. The identity mirror loss. The avoidant maintained their sense of self through your perception of them. You saw qualities in them they couldn't see in themselves. You reflected back their strengths and potential in ways that helped them believe in their own value. You held a version of them that was more generous and optimistic than their internal self-concept, and that external version helped them be better than they would have been alone. But without you, the avoidant is losing access to this identity mirror. They're confronting a self-image that's harsher and more limited than the one they maintained while you were present. The loss of this mirror manifests as the avoidant struggling to remember who they are at their best. They know intellectually that they're capable and valuable, but they can't feel it the way they could when you reflected those qualities back to them. They try to summon confidence and find only doubt. They attempt to access their better qualities and encounter only flaws and limitations. The avoidant is realizing that their sense of positive identity was partially constructed through your loving perception. And without that perception, they're left with only their own critical internal voice that never thought they were good enough. The recognition includes the avoidant understanding how much your belief in them motivated their growth and effort. They tried harder because you saw potential in them. They pushed themselves because your confidence made them believe they could succeed. They took risks because your support made failure less terrifying. The avoidant thought they were self-motivated, but your presence was the foundation that made self-motivation possible. Without you believing in them, they're struggling to believe in themselves, and this struggle reveals how dependent their self-concept was on your reflection. The mirror loss also means the avoidant has no one who knows them well enough to reflect them accurately anymore. Other people in their life see only surface versions or partial aspects. No one else has the depth of knowledge about them that you accumulated through intimate relationship. No one else can reflect back the full complexity of who they are because no one else has witnessed enough of their life to hold that complexity. The avoidant is recognizing that being truly known by someone is rare and valuable, and they took being known by you for granted. Now they're unknown to everyone, including themselves, and the isolation is profound. The safety and stability foundation. The avoidant believed they created their own safety and stability through independence and self-reliance. They didn't need anyone to make them feel secure because security came from depending only on themselves. But life without you is revealing that you were the foundation of safety that allowed their supposed independence to function. The avoidant feels fundamentally less safe in the world without you, and this insecurity is manifesting in ways they can't ignore or rationalize away. They're anxious in situations that never bothered them before. They're hypervigilant about potential threats they would have dismissed. They're seeking reassurance from others in ways they never did when you were present. This foundation recognition emerges through the avoidance awareness of how you functioned as a secure base, even while they maintained distance from you. Knowing you were there allowed them to take risks and face challenges without overwhelming anxiety. Your existence in their life created background safety that made foreground independence possible. The avoidant could be confident and autonomous because they had the security of knowing someone cared about their well-being and would be there if they needed support. They never had to test that support because its availability was sufficient to create the security they needed. The recognition also includes the avoidant realizing all the specific ways you provided safety they never acknowledged. You remembered things they forgot, creating reliability in their daily life. You noticed when something was wrong even when they didn't tell you, providing vigilance they didn't have to maintain alone. You created predictability and routine that grounded them when everything else felt chaotic. You were the constant in their life that made variables manageable, and without that constant, everything feels unstable and threatening. The avoidant is learning that safety isn't purely individual but relational, created through having someone who's consistently present and attentive. The foundation loss forces the avoidant to confront that their independence was only possible because of your dependable presence. They weren't actually independent. They were supported in ways they refused to see, allowed to feel independent because you were handling the dependency needs they couldn't acknowledge. The avoidant is recognizing that true independence would mean functioning well without any foundation, and they're not functioning well. They're struggling, anxious, and seeking stability they can't generate internally. This struggle proves they need the foundation you provided, and acknowledging that need is devastating to someone whose entire identity was built on not needing anyone for safety. The intimacy hunger breakthrough. The avoidant spent the relationship avoiding intimacy, maintaining careful emotional distance to protect themselves from vulnerability. They told themselves they didn't need deep connection, that surface-level relationships were sufficient, that intimacy created more problems than it solved. But separation from you has triggered an intimacy hunger they can't suppress or deny. The avoidant is experiencing visceral longing for the specific kind of closeness that only exists with someone who knows you deeply and accepts you completely. They're craving vulnerability and emotional nakedness in ways that contradict everything they've told themselves about their needs and preferences. This hunger breakthrough manifests as the avoidant finding all other relationships insufficient and unsatisfying. Friends and family provide connection, but it's not the intimate connection they're craving. New romantic interests might offer attraction or compatibility, but they lack the depth and knowledge that comes from years of accumulated intimacy. The avoidant is discovering that intimacy can't be quickly replicated or easily replaced because it's built through thousands of small moments of vulnerability and acceptance over extended time. What they had with you was rare and precious, and they're recognizing its value only now that it's gone. The hunger also includes the avoidant's recognition of how much they miss being fully known by someone. They miss being able to communicate with shorthand references and shared history. They miss the comfort of being with someone who understands their quirks and patterns without explanation. They miss the safety of being vulnerable with someone who's seen them at their worst and stayed anyway. The avoidant is realizing that being deeply known is a fundamental human need they were denying by maintaining distance. They wanted intimacy the entire time, but couldn't admit it because admitting it would have required acknowledging need and dependency. The breakthrough forces the avoidant to confront that they sabotaged the exact thing they actually wanted. They avoided intimacy with you because it terrified them, but that avoidance cost them the deep connection they're now desperate for. The avoidant is experiencing the pain of wanting something they destroyed through their defensive behavior. They're hungry for intimacy with you specifically because you're the person who knows them best, but that intimacy isn't available anymore because they pushed you away. The hunger is teaching them that avoiding vulnerability doesn't protect you from pain, but ensures you experience the pain of loneliness and disconnection instead. The practical life support recognition. The avoidant maintained the belief that they managed practical life independently without needing anyone's help or input. They handled their responsibilities, managed their household, organized their schedule without assistance. But daily life without you is revealing the countless ways you supported their practical functioning that they never registered as support. The avoidant is struggling with tasks and responsibilities that seemed manageable during the relationship, and this struggle is forcing recognition of how much you were doing that they took for granted or never even noticed. The recognition emerges through small failures and difficulties that accumulate into undeniable pattern. The avoidant forgets appointments they would have remembered when you were tracking their schedule. They eat poorly because you were the one planning meals and ensuring nutrition. Their living space becomes chaotic because you maintained order through small daily efforts they never observed. Bills get paid late because you handled reminders and administrative tasks invisibly. Each small failure reveals another way you were supporting their practical life without them acknowledging or appreciating the support. The practical support recognition also includes the avoidant realizing how much mental and emotional labor you carried that they never recognized as labor. You remembered birthdays and bought gifts, maintained social connections with friends and family, planned activities and coordinated logistics, handled conflicts and solved problems before they escalated into crises. All of this invisible work created smooth functioning the avoidant experienced as natural state rather than as achievement requiring effort and attention. Now that you're gone, the work becomes visible through its absence, and the avoidant is overwhelmed by trying to manage everything alone. The recognition forces the avoidant to acknowledge that they weren't as capable and independent as they believed. They were functioning well because you were compensating for their limitations and filling gaps they didn't know existed. The avoidant is learning that partnership means sharing burden in ways that make individual load lighter, and they took that lighter load for granted instead of recognizing it as gift you were giving them. They need your practical support as much as they need your emotional support. And admitting this need is humbling for someone who prided themselves on self-sufficiency in all domains of life. The joy and pleasure capacity loss. The avoidant is discovering that their capacity to experience joy and pleasure has diminished significantly without you. Activities that used to bring satisfaction feel flat and meaningless. Accomplishments that would have created pride produce only empty recognition. Beautiful experiences that should generate happiness leave them feeling numb and disconnected. The avoidant is realizing that you weren't just present for their joy, but essential to their capacity to feel it. Your participation made experiences joyful, and without you, even positive things feel hollow and insufficient. This capacity loss reveals that joy is relational rather than purely individual. The avoidant thought they experienced pleasure independently, that their happiness was self-generated through engaging with activities and experiences they enjoyed. But they're learning that joy emerges from sharing, that pleasure is amplified through connection, that happiness requires witness and participation from someone who matters. You were the witness that made experiences feel real and significant. You were the participant who made activities feel fun rather than just occupying time. The avoidant's joy was dependent on you in ways they never consciously recognized until they lost access to it. The recognition includes the avoidant understanding how much they miss sharing good things with you specifically. When something positive happens, their first impulse is to tell you, and then they remember they can't. When they experience something beautiful, they want you there to see it with them, and your absence makes the beauty feel incomplete. The avoidant is discovering that good experiences feel less good when they can't share them with you, that their joy was never purely individual but always relational. They need you to experience life as pleasurable rather than just tolerable, and this need contradicts everything they told themselves about emotional independence. The capacity loss also means the avoidant can't simply replace you with other people to restore their joy. Other relationships don't generate the same depth of shared pleasure because they lack the history and intimacy that makes sharing meaningful. The avoidant is learning that joy with you was specific to you, built on years of accumulated experiences and inside jokes and shared reference points that create unique connection. They can have surface-level fun with others, but they can't replicate the deep satisfaction of sharing life with someone who knows them completely. The loss of joy capacity is teaching them that they need you specifically, not just anyone, and that specificity makes the need more painful because you're the irreplaceable person they pushed away. The future possibility collapse. The avoidant maintained vague future fantasies that included you even while maintaining distance in the present. They imagined that someday when they were ready, when they'd done enough personal work, when circumstances aligned, they might build something real with you. These fantasies allowed them to avoid commitment in the present while still holding on to relationship possibility in the future. But time without you is revealing that the future they imagined isn't available anymore. You're moving forward with your life in ways that don't include them, and the avoidant is recognizing that the possibilities they took for granted have expired through their inaction and avoidance. The collapse of future possibility creates specific grief about lost potential rather than just lost actuality. The avoidant is mourning not just the relationship they had, but the relationship they could have had if they'd been capable of showing up differently. They're grieving the life they could have built together, the experiences they could have shared, the growth they could have supported in each other. All of these possibilities existed when you were together, but the avoidant's inability to commit meant the possibilities remained unrealized. Now they're gone completely, and the avoidant is recognizing they needed those possibilities more than they acknowledged. The recognition also includes the avoidant understanding that they can't create similar possibilities with someone new. What they had with you was built on specific history, specific chemistry, specific alignment that can't be replicated. Other people might offer different possibilities, but they can't offer the same possibilities because those were unique to the relationship between you. The avoidant is learning that some opportunities are time-limited and person-specific, and missing them means losing something irreplaceable. They needed the future with you that their avoidance prevented from materializing, and now that need is exposed through the permanent foreclosure of possibility. The collapse forces the avoidant to confront how their defensive patterns cost them exactly what they wanted. They wanted relationship with you but couldn't tolerate the vulnerability required to build it. They wanted future together but couldn't commit to present. They wanted possibilities but destroyed them through inaction and distance. The avoidant is recognizing that protecting themselves from vulnerability meant destroying the futures that could have made vulnerability worthwhile. They needed you not just in the present, but in all the potential futures they'll never get to experience. And this recognition of compound loss is overwhelming. The authentic self-expression permission. The avoidant maintained careful performance of who they thought they should be, filtering self-expression through what seemed safe and acceptable. But with you, they experienced moments of authentic self-expression that they didn't have with anyone else. You created space where they could be real, where they could express thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment or rejection. The avoidant is realizing they need that permission and space more than they understood. Without you, They're back to performing constantly, unable to access or express their authentic self, and the suppression is exhausting and alienating. This recognition emerges through the avoidant noticing how much they edit themselves in other relationships. They can't say what they actually think or feel with friends because those relationships don't have the depth and trust that makes honesty safe. They can't be vulnerable with family because those relationships carry too much history and judgment. They can't relax their performance with new romantic interests because they're trying to manage impression and control perception. Only with you could they be unfiltered and real. And losing that space for authenticity means losing access to parts of themselves. The need for authentic expression space also reveals to the avoidant how much they were using distance with you to avoid fully embracing the permission you offered. You created safety for them to be real, but they were too scared to fully accept that safety. They expressed authentically in moments, but then retreated back to performance and protection. The avoidant is recognizing they had exactly what they needed with you and couldn't allow themselves to fully receive it. They sabotaged the safe space for authentic self-expression through their defensive behavior, and now they're stuck in relationships where that safety doesn't exist at all. The recognition forces the avoidant to acknowledge that they need someone who gives them permission to be themselves without performance or filtering. They need the specific acceptance you offered where they could be flawed and messy and still be valued. They need relationship where they don't have to manage perception because the other person sees and accepts them as they are. The avoidant is learning that this kind of acceptance is rare and precious, and they took it for granted while they had it. Now they're struggling to be authentic anywhere because they lost the one relationship where authenticity felt safe, and this loss is teaching them they need that safety more than their defenses allowed them to admit. The existential loneliness emergence. The avoidant claimed to prefer solitude, to be comfortable alone, to need extensive time away from people to feel balanced. But separation from you has revealed the difference between chosen solitude and existential loneliness. The avoidant is experiencing profound isolation that has nothing to do with being physically alone. They're lonely in crowds, lonely with friends, lonely in all contexts because they lack the deep connection with you that made solitude feel chosen rather than imposed. The existential loneliness is teaching them that they need intimate connection to make independence tolerable, and without that connection, even chosen solitude becomes unbearable isolation. This emergence happens because the avoidant is recognizing that being alone feels fundamentally different when you know someone cares about you versus when you're truly isolated. During the relationship, their alone time was chosen, separation from connection that remained available. They could be solitary, knowing they could reach out to you if they wanted connection. But now their aloneness is isolation without available connection, and the difference is devastating. The avoidant is learning that they didn't actually prefer solitude. They preferred the ability to choose between solitude and connection, and that ability required having you as available option. The loneliness also reveals to the avoidant how much they were using distance with you to avoid confronting their fear of deeper connection. They maintained space partially because they were scared of how much they needed you, and distance allowed them to deny the depth of that need. But now, without you, they're experiencing the full force of the need they were defending against, and the need is overwhelming. The avoidant is discovering they're deeply lonely for intimate connection, and that loneliness was always there but masked by your presence at manageable distance. They needed you closer than they allowed you to be, and now they're experiencing the loneliness that their defensive distance was creating all along. The emergence of existential loneliness forces the avoidant to reconsider their entire orientation toward relationship and independence. They thought they were independent people who chose solitude, but they're learning they're human beings who need intimate connection like everyone else. The avoidant is confronting that their preference for distance was defensive adaptation to fear rather than authentic personality trait. They need deep connection as much as any human needs it, and pretending otherwise just meant experiencing loneliness while denying they were experiencing it. Now they can't deny it anymore, and the recognition is breaking through defenses that have structured their entire adult life. The growth and development catalyst loss. The avoidant is recognizing that you were the primary catalyst for their personal growth and development. Your presence challenged them to be better. Your feedback helped them identify blind spots. Your support gave them confidence to attempt change. Without you, their growth has stalled completely. The avoidant is falling back into old patterns, regressing to previous limitations, losing ground they'd gained during the relationship. This regression is revealing how much they needed you as catalyst for becoming the person they wanted to be. The catalyst loss manifests as the avoidant noticing they're not working on themselves anymore. During the relationship, they were motivated to address their issues because those issues affected you and threatened the connection. They went to therapy, read self-help books, tried to be more emotionally available because your presence made growth feel important and necessary. But without you, the motivation has disappeared. The avoidant has stopped trying to change because there's no one they care about enough to change for. No relationship they value enough to do the hard work of growth. They're stagnating and they can feel it. The recognition includes the avoidant understanding how you provided specific growth support they can't replicate alone. You held them accountable without being controlling. You offered perspective without being critical. You celebrated progress without making them feel pressured. You created the exact conditions that make growth possible: safety combined with challenge, acceptance combined with high standards, patience combined with expectation. The avoidant is learning that personal development isn't purely individual but relational, requiring someone who cares enough to support you through difficulty and believe in your capacity to change. The catalyst loss forces the avoidant to acknowledge they need you for becoming who they want to be. They have goals and aspirations for themselves, but they can't achieve those goals alone. They need your belief in them, your support during struggle, your witness to progress. The avoidant is recognizing that they were growing with you in ways they can't grow without you, and this recognition reveals how deeply they need your presence in their life. They need you not just for who you are, but for who you help them become, and losing that catalytic influence means losing access to their own better self. The unconditional acceptance need. The avoidant lived their entire life feeling conditionally accepted, believing they had to perform certain ways to be valued by others. But with you, they experienced something different. Acceptance that wasn't contingent on their achievements or appearance or perfect behavior. You saw their flaws and loved them anyway. You witnessed their worst moments and stayed. You knew their limitations and valued them despite those limitations. The avoidant is realizing they need that unconditional acceptance more than they can survive without it, and losing it has left them feeling fundamentally unlovable and alone. This need recognition emerges through the avoidance experience of how other relationships feel now. Every interaction requires performance and management. Every connection is contingent on them being certain ways and hiding other ways. The avoidant is exhausted from managing perception and maintaining acceptable presentation because they lost the one relationship where they could stop performing and just be. They're discovering that unconditional acceptance is essential for psychological health, that humans need at least one person who loves them without conditions, and they had that with you but couldn't appreciate it while it was available. The recognition also forces the avoidant to confront how they responded to your unconditional acceptance with distance and avoidance. You offered them exactly what they needed, and they couldn't receive it because receiving it would mean acknowledging how much they needed it. The avoidant is realizing they were running from the thing they most desperately required, that your unconditional love terrified them precisely because it was what they'd wanted their entire life. They sabotaged the acceptance they needed because need felt like weakness, and now they're stuck without the acceptance they can't survive without. The need for unconditional acceptance ultimately reveals to the avoidant that they're not as strong or independent as they pretended to be. They need someone who accepts them completely, who loves them despite their flaws, who stays even when they're difficult. The avoidant is learning that this need isn't weakness, but humanity, that everyone needs unconditional acceptance, that their defensive independence was just protecting them from acknowledging this universal need. They need you specifically because you offered what they needed and they can't find it anywhere else. The recognition is devastating because it exposes the depth of need they spent their life denying, but it's also the truth that might finally allow them to pursue real connection rather than defended distance.